Hey everybody, Ambassador Kosh here with you once again, and we're going to be continuing our uh, journey through the Babylon 5 universe, and we're going to round out, um, we'll kind of round out the series on the ladies of Babylon 5, which we covered with Susan Ivanova and Delin, and I'm not saying there aren't other interesting female characters in B5, far from it. But we're going to finish out what I call the the feminine trilogy or trinity, excuse me, in Babylon 5, and we're going to round out this particular part of the series with Lyta Alexander, and we're gonna do a little bit of a connection and everything with these three ladies of Babylon 5: Dylan, Susan Ivanova, and Lyta Alexander, with something that's been going on the last couple of weeks and everything in regards to what's been going on in the film industry, in particular with Charlie's Angels. But this will focus on Lita and her story and all. But I think this honestly is a good opportunity because you have this narrative going on with the new release of this reboot of Charlie's Angels, and I think these three ladies within the Babylon 5 universe present a interesting dichotomy between when women characters are written well and portrayed well, and when women characters are portrayed badly and written badly. So, anyway, that being said, let's get into Miss Lita Alexander. Um, Lita, everything belonged to an organization that was sort of connected with Earth Force, at the same time wasn't. She was a part of the Psi Corps, which was the um, organization that was created to police and regulate telepaths that existed in the world. And Lita, actually, the first time we meet her, she was in the pilot episode in the beginning, and she is there on Babylon 5 as the station's registered telepath because regulations, I think there was regulation or something along those lines, or there was some sort of law or whatever, what have you. But she was on the station as the Earth Force registered telepath and Psi Corps' representative on Babylon 5. Now, she didn't have any diplomatic goings on or authority or anything like that, but Psi Corps wanted one of their own on the station to keep an eye on things and to let Psi Corps know if any other telepaths that were unregistered came through the station. Now, what ends up happening with Lita is, after the pilot episode, her absence is kind of explained away, and you have another telepath brought in, Talia Winters, who's in, I think, she's in season 2, and I think she's in season 1 and 2, and I think she gets long story short, Talia Winters to everything. She leaves at some point during season 3, and this is where Lita comes back in. And what you find out is, in her during the storyline of the pilot episode, The Gathering, that I've talked about before, involving the assassination attempt on Ambassador Kosh, and she's brought in to try and do a telepathic scan on him to try and figure out who poisoned him and who tried to kill him. And what ends up happening as a result of that is Lita gets shipped back to Earth and everything by Psi Corps, because up until this point, no telepath or any human or anyone have really had any contact with the Vorlons, and she's one of the first people for this to happen to. Anyway, Talia ends up leaving, for a matter of speaking, leaving Psi Corps, and she charters a ship to Vorlon space, and she has to pay through the nose for this, but that's honestly beside the point. because ships do not go to Vorlon space. But what she ends up doing is she charters the ship and says, "Look, I know y'all won't go any further, whatever the case is." And she takes an escape pod and she jettisons it in, and she gets jettisoned out of the ship. And she's floating there in just on the inside of the border of the Vorlon space, and she's hoping like heck that the Vorlons will respond to her telepathic signal, because she's sending out this telepathic signal hoping that they pick up on her. And at some point, they actually do. And what ends up happening is Lyta gets picked up and taken to the Vorlon homeworld. But here's the thing, they swear her to absolute secrecy. She's not to divulge anything that she sees there, any of the technology, their true form, nothing. But what else they do with Lyta is they actually amplify and supercharge her telepathic abilities. Because within Babylon 5, telepaths are ranked by a rating like a P, from a P1, which is just a very weak baseline telepath, all the way up to a P12, which is a very powerful telepath. And those type of telepaths are actually allowed to become what they call psychops. Lyta is like a P5 or a P6. She's just a rank and file telepath and everything, and she has some decent ability, but she's not uber super powerful. But what ends up happening is the Vorlons enhance her abilities, make her super powerful, make her a very powerful telepath, well beyond her natural ability. And they end up sending her back to Babylon 5 after Talia Winters leaves. But the thing is, Lyta's not there as a representative of Psychor. She's now a liaison for Ambassador Kosh. And I think that's another really interesting relationship, though there's not a lot of screen time between Lyta and Kosh, but you get the impression that Kosh kind of relies on her, trusts her, and he does use her periodically to do that thing where he'll split off a portion of himself and let it ride around in Lyta for a while so he can get out and about and everything without having to be in his entire suit and having to walk all around Babylon 5 or what have you. And she's very much Ambassador Kosh's Girl Friday, matter of speaking. If y'all aren't familiar with that term, it's a very, very old term. It's like an assistant or anything. I know that's what, if y'all might get this reference or anything. Tony Stark, one of his operating systems, he calls Friday, and that's kind of an allusion back to the term Girl Friday. And it's not a derogatory term or a sexist term per se. It's actually kind of a endearing term and everything. So please don't misunderstand me when I use that reference. But what ends up happening is, as the war between the younger races and the shadows starts to ramp up, Lyta takes on a much more important role, because Sheridan in particular, and Ivanova, and some of the others, some of the major characters and everything on Babylon 5, start to realize just how much more powerful Lyta is, and they ask her, "Hey, can you go out with us on this XYZ mission?" And there's a few instances where this does happen. And everything, and particularly, especially at one point, she wasn't anything when the Shadows kill Kosh in retaliation for the Vorlons getting involved in the war. She's not on the station there, sadly. But what ends up happening is they go on one particular mission or anything, because the coalition against the Shadows, they get these brand new ships that are a mesh of Vorlon and Minbari technology called the White Stars. And I remember in particular, I think it's Ivanova or somebody who said that the ship looks like a plucked turkey or a plucked chicken or something like that. But what ends up happening is Sheridan and I know Lyta for a fact go out on this mission, and they're trying to do a reconnaissance on if a White Star ship can actually take out a Shadow capital ship. And this is the first this is the first instance where you get to see how much more powerful Lyta has become, because what you learn is in the first Shadow War, a lot of the major races, in particular the Minbari and so on, they would use their telepaths as a way to block or incapacitate shadow vessels, because the telepaths had that kind of effect on them. And what ends up happening is you have the scene where Lyta tries to do this to a shadow vessel, but she's not focused enough and everything to do it. But what ends up happening is Sheridan takes her by the hand and says, "Hey, are you okay?" And she grabs hold of his hand, and she has this telepathic flash and everything where she sees what happened to Kosh, and it ticks her off because she had a real personal connection to Kosh. She cared about him and everything just about as much as I think Sheridan did. And she gets riled up. She gets really cheesed off. And she's like, "Burn. Burn, you jerks." That's not the word she uses, but anyway. And she actually the shadow vessel is incapacitated to the point where Sheridan tells the crew, "Concentrate all fire on that ship," and they destroy the shadow vessel. And she looks back at Sheridan and she says, "For Kosh." Because that's just how much Kosh meant to her. And as the war progresses and everything, and all with the shadows, Lyta continues to play a very important role. When Ivanova and Delenn go to Zahadum after Sheridan's suicide mission, but not exactly a suicide mission because obviously he didn't survive, but Lorien brings him back and everything from the edge of death. But Lyta goes with Ivanova and Delenn and everything to Zahadum to see if they can rescue Sheridan. And she has this moment and everything where she's trying to scan to see if there's any sign of Sheridan, and unfortunately they don't discover anything. Excuse me. But eventually, as I've alluded to before, the shadows do get driven away, and Lyta even plays an important role in that because she acts as a go-between for the Vorlons and the shadows, because they both can access her, use her as a go-between, or anything, for lack of a better word, to communicate with Sheridan and Delenn and all the other younger races. And what ends up happening is she is a bridge and everything for the Vorlons and Shadows to communicate their intentions and try to sway Sheridan and Delenn and everything to come to their side. But of course, neither way works and everything, and Lorien intervenes and everything and ganks both Sheridan and Delenn out of that telepathic conference and everything. And later on, Alexander and everything, she's kind of in between everything. She can't be with the Psi Corps because she's become too powerful as a telepath, and she doesn't want them to have access to her, because if they did, they could figure out what the Vorlons did to her, and she can't allow that to happen, because even though the Vorlons are gone, she's still got these psychic commands that are embedded in her mind and everything that the Vorlons put there and everything as safeguards and everything for if certain circumstances ever happen to arise and they're not around for them to happen. And Lyta, her story honestly is not that very long or anything. She does play a role in the Earth Civil War, but it's not a huge role in her or whatever. But season 5 and everything of the show and everything, her story does pick up some, because she does get involved with the rebel faction of telepaths that are wanting to break free from Psi Corps and bring Psi Corps down. And you don't get unfortunately, with season 5, that whole situation doesn't get fleshed out very well, and you don't really you don't find out what happened with Lyta and the telepaths of war, except for maybe the fact that it succeeded somehow or whatever. But Lyta, she's not necessarily a bad character. Far from it. She is a very interesting character, but there's just not a whole lot to her story and her progression as a character and everything that you can really delve all that much into. Um, she's almost like a remnant of the influence that the Vorlons had on the universe and on the younger races, and in particular humanity. And I guess in a way that's an interesting aspect of her, because Lyta's story is one of very much of a rebel, because she does rebel against Psychor, and she wants to give other telepaths the opportunity to live their own life and not have to live under the restraints and controls of Psychor, because she was raised by the Psychor from the time she was a young woman, and she has seen firsthand what all the bad things that the Psychor has done for psychics and just for the general public and everything, and she wants that to end. And she becomes a very staunch, outspoken advocate for telepathic freedom, or telepaths having freedom and not having to join the Corps. And in a way to break down the negative feelings that normal people and everything who are non-telepathic people have towards telepaths. And I think this is done relatively well with her character. You get a little bit of that and everything with Talia Winters as well, but with Lyta Alexander, that whole idea of the idea that normal non-telepathic people and telepaths can live together and there not be any uneasiness or fear and everything of that does play very well within her storyline. Because yeah, she was enhanced by the Vorlons and so on, but she takes those abilities that she was given by the Vorlons and uses them often more times than not and everything for very positive ends. Now, she does get a little bit militant at one point and everything in season 5 about allowing telepaths to have the freedom to live as they want to live and not have to worry about um, non-telepaths discriminating against them or pushing them aside out of the normal population. So, but kind of transitioning from there and everything, because as I said, there's not a whole lot to lead a story. There is some, and what I've talked about here is pretty much the major beats of her story arc and so on. I would say the one thing you can take away from Lyta's story and her progression through the show is what can happen to a person who's gifted with extraordinary talents and abilities. In this case, a very powerful telepath and empathic person. And it would have been very easy for her powers and her abilities, her telepathic powers and abilities, to corrupt her, or for herself to be allowed to be corrupted or manipulated by others. But in the end, she's able to get what she wants, but at the same time retain who she is as a woman. And I think that's something that can resonate with all of us. So, but as I started to say, transitioning from there into what's been going on with this latest reboot of Charlie's Angels, most everybody now knows how badly the movie has done at the box office and all the controversy that has come out, in particular with what Elizabeth Banks has said about why the movie bombed and why it flopped and why it's gotten so much negative press. And unfortunately, part of this negative press is on her. And the parallel I want to draw is this. Now, I hope I have painted a very decent picture of Ambassador Delenn, Susan Ivanova, and Lyta Alexander here. And this series was written by a man, and one J. Michael Straczynski, and he wrote it competently. He wrote it, I would say, for the '90s. He wrote it very well for any time, honestly. To be perfect, let's just be candid here. He was a talented and gifted writer, and he knew what the heck he was doing, and he knew how to hand off the scripts and the story that he wrote to directors and producers and everything who could bring his vision to life. And he was himself an executive producer on the show. He had the ability to say, hey, this is what I think should be done here. This is what I think shouldn't be done here. And he got this idea of independent, strong women in the future down very well. Because granted, the Babylon 5 universe is populated by women of all walks of life, and you have that dichotomy here with Ivanova, with Delenn, and with Lyta Alexander. And granted, they don't have a whole lot of screen time on the everything together in the TV show, but on their own, they have a lot of their stories, either joined together or independently. Their stories are very compelling and they're very well done. And I'm not saying that the women and everything, Kristen Stewart and the other two ladies who acted in this reboot of Charlie's Angels, are bad actresses. Far from it. I'm sure they're very gifted actresses. I've seen Kristen Stewart in Twilight. You can kind of blame my wife for that one and everything. Now, not in total and everything. I did go see Twilight and everything when it came back out, when it came out back in the day, because at the time, I had a thing for Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And that's a series or anything. If y'all are interested, comment down below and let me know if you want me to cover that, because that's very much a '90s, and honestly, yeah, it does go into the 2000s a little. But that's another pop culture TV show that I really loved and enjoyed, and it really resonated with me. And I have the box set of it and everything, along with Angel as well. But that the whole reason for that, me talking about Buffy and Twilight, I went for the whole vampire storyline aspect of Twilight because I had such a fond and strong feeling for Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Anyway, getting back around to my point. It is possible for strong, feminine, independent, and complex characters to be written and portrayed on screen, be it on TV or be it in movies. It doesn't matter. And the thing what I think is important here is the people who produced Babylon 5 and the people who produced Buffy the Vampire Slayer even wrote women in these shows that made them complex, made them relatable, and made them interesting to men and women alike. And it did not require them to pander to this idea of complex, strong women and everything, and tearing men down in the process. To put it bluntly, neither Babylon 5 or Twilight or Buffy the Vampire Slayer went woke. And even back in those days, that phrase did not exist. Go get woke, go broke. The 80s and the 90s and even the early 2000s were a time when get woke, go broke didn't exist. And I think it's honestly very sad that you have these directors and everything. I know I've kind of talked about this before. But if you've watched Babylon 5 or you've watched Buffy or if you've even watched Twilight or any other show that has female characters in it, they were written and portrayed competently. And no excuses were made or anything if a show didn't do well. If a show didn't do well, okay, fine. You take it on the chin, you move on, as I've talked about in my discussion of the movie industry in the 1980s. But I think I hope what I've presented here is this idea that you had feminine, strong, independent, capable female characters in TV of the 80s and the 90s and everything. In this, particularly in this case, Babylon 5 was a show of the 90s, pop culture of the 90s. So there. But that's the long and short of it here. So next time, I think I'm not exactly sure who we're going to cover for B5, but I promise you it will be interesting. As always, if you're liking what I'm doing, like and share and subscribe to my channel. By all means, if you want to reach me by Twitter, if you have ideas or comments that you want to share with me that won't fit into a comment down below, by all means, you can reach me on Twitter at Rogue5778. And until next time, my friends, this is Ambassador Kosh saying, I have always been here.